Hello everybody, this is Gregory with How I Lost Over 100 Pounds and I've kept it off for 30 plus years, where there should be no hesitance in your weight loss and in your weight maintenance. Today we're going to talk about the link between depression and weight gain and what are some things that you can do to sever that tie between depression and weight gain. Now before we begin, if you need help with weight loss, contact me through the Clarity FM link found here in the episode notes. Also check out my website, which has hundreds of articles and recipes that might be useful to you, my 2 books, which you can find on Amazon. I have a new movie podcast called The Cinema Rag, which you can find on Spotify or Apple. And lastly, if you appreciate my content at all, there is a link for PayPal. Now, I would say the large majority of obese people have been depressed or currently depressed or have always been depressed. And the only reason I say this is because I used to be overweight, and so I was depressed during that time. If you want a kind of glimpse of how dark my depression was, I would check out Confessions of an Obese Child, episode 19. The one where I talk about suicidal ideation and cutting. I'll see if I can remember to put a banner in the video for it. But it's certainly understandable that those who are overweight are depressed because, well, there's a variety of reasons. First of all, you're as a whole, and it's not as bad as when I was overweight back in the late 80s, early 90s, but there is a certain amount of social stigma. There is a certain amount of isolation and alienation. And there's just going to be depression on simple things like the inability to find clothes maybe that you like, and just looking at yourself in the mirror and just being invisible to people. Because when you're obese, today's generation is a little different, but when you're obese, you're either invisible or everyone's looking at you making fun of you. Now, I think today's generation, it's not so much the latter, it's more just you're invisible. But it's understandable why you would be depressed. And the problem with the depression, of course, is that it's going to fuel your eating, the self-loathing. I'm so sad, I'm pathetic, I'm never going to lose the weight, what's the point, what's the point, what's the point? And then you keep eating, right? And then you eat more and more, what's the point? And then like any addiction, right? The first bite is the sweetest and it gives you that cathartic release, but then with every subsequent bite, it doesn't feel as good, and then you start realizing, what was the point, why did I do this? And then you start self-loathing for doing that. And you can apply this to drinking or drugs. So what can we do to remedy that? What can we do to stop that? Because clearly, the more you are depressed, the more you're likely to eat. Now, if you look at the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the DSM, which is kind of the Bible for psychologists, psychiatrists, and so forth, and when they're looking at the criteria for depression, it can be, aside from the other things we're not going to talk about, but eating more than normal, but also the other one is the flip side. You eat less than normal. So there are people who get depressed who just don't eat. They just stop eating. I remember an old Jane Seymour, Christopher Reeve movie my parents loved called Somewhere in Time, where he goes back in time to meet a woman. And then, by the way, so he goes back in time to meet a woman, and for whatever reason, he goes back to like 1912, but whatever certain events cause him to go back to the present, and he's so depressed that he can't be with her that he just sits in a chair and just withers away and eventually dies. So there are people that when they get depressed, they stop eating, but I think the large majority of people who are watching this content probably eat when they are depressed, and that's why one of the reasons that you're fat. Now, you could be depressed because of childhood trauma, legit childhood trauma, like you were sexually abused, physically abused, neglect, all these things. And I would tell you, look, I understand what you're going through. The best thing is not to have the kind of victim mentality and always looking in the past, always looking in the past, always looking in the past. You know, this happened to me, this happened to me, this happened to me. And because what can happen is you just get mired in this wistful, I wouldn't even say it's wistful because it's not a positive thing, but you're always mired in the past and you're not looking at the future. And look, it sucks that you're overweight, and it sucks that you have some of the concomitant issues with obesity, like other medical problems, but also maybe social anxiety, social awkwardness, and other things. But the big question is, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? You know, we all have lemons. You got to make lemonade, because living a life of self-loathing is not good. It's going to lead to like the Brendan Fraser movie, The Whale, right? We don't want that kind of life. So depression and eating, clearly when you're depressed, you're going to eat more. So how can you stop that? Well, like with a lot of things, the best overall thing to do, which is the hardest thing, is to disassociate food from emotions and realize food is just for nurturing our bodies, not a psychological nurture and something like that. Now, typically to do that, you got to go back to when and why you developed a disordered relationship with food, which in my humble opinion is typically childhood trauma. So you have to address the childhood trauma. Some people do it because they're very introspective and retrospective, and they're able to do it, and they'll go to therapy and they'll really tackle it, and they can break that chain like I was able to do. And I talk about that in the second series, Reflections of a Weight Loss Warrior, or in the book. That's the first thing. But some people are not good with doing those things. They either don't have the talent to introspect, or they just don't want to do it because of the pain. But I would tell you, brothers and sisters in Christ, that if you don't do that, what's going to happen is it's essentially going to be a continuation of what you're doing now. So the littler step you can make is before you eat when you're depressed and you have the what's the point? I'm never going to lose the weight, You step back and you say, no, this is negativistic thinking. Eating this food is not going to make me feel better long term. It might make you feel better short term, especially if it's food that's high in the bliss point. But in the long run, it's not going to make me feel better. In the long run, it's only going to make things worse, and step away from it. Now, if it means having an accountability partner you can call, or if it's your spouse, or if it means not having junk food, or if it means not having your credit card with you when you're at work, we have an episode on that, or whatever it is, do it. Now, today with Uber Eats and Grubhub and all these things, it's just so easy to call, right? So even if you don't have junk food in the house, you can easily call it in, and that's one of the problems. And that's why it's even more important than, like, for example, when I was a kid, when we didn't have these things at our disposal as much, that you really make that disassociation between emotions and food, because it's just so much harder now to not call in food that can be delivered to your house in 20 minutes, right? And the next thing you know, you're binge eating it. So the key is doing the deep work. But in the short run, journaling, talking to people, talking to yourself, there's nothing wrong with talking to yourself. Talking yourself through it. And then if you really need something like to fill up your void, and you're not at the point where you can completely eliminate eating bad food, then there's like gradations of bad food. And we kind of talk about this in the calorie in, calorie out episode, how a lot of guys are just doing calorie in, calorie out. I just binge eat, and then I'm going to go run 7 miles or be at the gym 7 hours. So if you're like, oh God, I really need that 4 muffins, instead maybe eat a big bowl of blueberries and whipped cream, which is still sweet, but it's not going to be as bad as the 4 muffins. So you can do something like that. But overall, the key is the depression really, look, newsflash, even after you lose the weight, because this is like when people think, oh, I'm going to make $1 million, I'll be happy. And then they make $1 million and they're still not happy. Or I'm going to move into a bigger house. Or I'll be happy when I get that Lexus or that Ferrari, and you get in, you're like, it's just, you're the same guy. You can put an alcoholic in the nicest palace in the world, and they're still going to be an alcoholic. So I'm going to have a newsflash to you guys. Look, if you're suffering from depression now, and you think, oh, I won't be depressed when I lose my weight, let me tell you, you're wrong. Okay, let me tell you, you're wrong. You're going to have new obstacles that you're going to have to deal with. Check out the Reflections of a Weight Loss Series playlist, because I talk about a lot of them there. On some levels, your life will be better because you've lost the weight, but now you have this new monster that you're dealing with, which is weight maintenance. Plus, you're dealing with imposter syndrome and other issues like that. Either way, depression is normal. As humans, we're going to have a couple of days of the weepy, so to speak. But long-term depression, you should certainly get help. Go seek a medical professional, because this channel is not here to help people with depression. But the key is understand that it's normal to be depressed if you're obese. But more importantly, it's changing your paradigm and realizing, yes, I can't do anything about the past aside from breaking this chain between emotions and food, breaking this disordered eating that I have. That's really the only thing I can focus on from the past. And everything else needs to be, this is day 1, I'm starting fresh. And just go from there. And use the skills and talents that I've given you over here to do the best you can going forward. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you if you suffer from depression because of obesity. I'd like to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Until next time, take care, God bless, and pray.